She mocked her opponent's family on national TV. But no one expected what happened next. A silent father stood up, and in 10 seconds, the entire debate changed forever. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The venue was packed, standing room only. Camera crews bustled around the perimeter, adjusting lights and microphones, while political commentators whispered into earpieces, prepping for their live segments. The stage was set for one of the most anticipated political debates of the season, and the energy in the room was electric. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be a typical, slow-moving policy discussion. This was a face-off between two rising stars from opposite ends of the political spectrum, each one determined not just to defend her beliefs, but to make a statement that would ripple across the country. On the left podium stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas. Known for her boldness, unapologetic attitude, and flair for confrontation, Crockett had made headlines more than once for her fiery speeches and no-nonsense takedowns. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and she certainly wasn't afraid of this debate. Facing her from the right was Karoline Leavitt, a young but fast-rising Republican voice. With her sharp focus and relentless preparation, Leavitt had carved a name for herself as someone who could hold her own in high-pressure political moments. Unlike many newcomers, she didn't shrink in the spotlight. She leaned into it. The contrast was clear. Crockett was fire. Leavitt was ice. And that dynamic was exactly what brought in the cameras, the headlines, and the millions of viewers tuning in from across the country. As the moderator gave a short introduction, laying out the rules and format, the two women nodded politely but kept their eyes on each other. It was a look of mutual respect, but also quiet challenge. Neither one planned to back down. The first segment opened with economic policy. Crockett led with passion. She painted a picture of working families struggling to make ends meet, calling for expanded safety nets, tax reform, and investment in under-resourced communities. Her voice rose as she spoke of the American dream slipping away for many. Leavitt responded with calm, clear points. She focused on reducing government overreach, encouraging free market solutions, and holding the line on spending. She argued that over-regulation was strangling innovation and opportunity. The audience shifted in their seats, many leaning forward, hanging on each word. Then came the topic of border security. Crockett criticized the harsh immigration policies of the previous administration, arguing for comprehensive reform and humanity at the border. Leavitt didn't flinch. She defended her party's stance on national security and control of illegal crossings, saying, "A nation without borders is a nation without laws." Each side drew cheers and claps from different corners of the room. The tension built, but the debate remained respectful. Heated, yes, but within bounds. Healthcare followed. Climate policy. Education reform. Both women remained locked in, a verbal chess match where every word mattered. Crockett used personal stories and emotion. Leavitt leaned on data and structure. Their styles were different, but both were captivating. For 20 minutes, the two candidates exchanged blows without crossing any lines. Political disagreements, yes. Personal attacks, no. Until everything changed with one simple prompt from the moderator. Let's talk now about character and personal integrity in today's political landscape. It was a turning point. What followed would become the moment everyone would talk about. The viral clip, the trending topic, the heated debate on every news network. Crockett, feeling the momentum on her side, grinned slightly. She was in her element. This was where she thrived. Personal conviction, strong opinions, and moments that made headlines. Leavitt, meanwhile, straightened her posture and took a breath. She understood the gravity of this part of the conversation. For her, politics wasn't just policy, it was personal. And it was in this section that she intended to speak from the heart. She started calmly, reflecting on how her values were shaped not just by textbooks or political mentors, but by the everyday struggles and sacrifices of her family, especially her father. The room softened for a moment. Leavitt spoke about honesty, responsibility, and how those values were instilled in her from childhood. It was a vulnerable moment, one that felt authentic. Even her critics had to admit, this didn't feel rehearsed. Then came Crockett's turn. With her characteristic flair, she delivered a biting remark meant to slice through what she viewed as an overly polished narrative. "Oh, come on, Karoline," she said, waving a hand with a smirk. "Is this the part where we all hold hands and sing songs about how perfect your family is?" Laughter erupted from parts of the crowd. Crockett wasn't done. "I bet your dad still reads bedtime stories about Ronald Reagan." This line was sharper, funnier to some, but deeply personal to others. The room paused. Even those laughing seemed unsure of whether they should keep going. The joke had hit harder than expected, and the camera panned briefly to Karoline's face. Her jaw tightened. She didn't react immediately. She didn't fire back. But the mood in the room had shifted, and that's when something completely unexpected happened. From the very back row, someone stood up. Slowly. Silently. It was a man in his late 50s, wearing a plain suit and a serious expression, Karoline Leavitt's father. He didn't say a word. Didn't raise his hand or make a scene. He just stood there, calm, steady, and proud. And suddenly no one in the room was laughing anymore. Karoline Leavitt had just begun to hit her stride. With firm conviction and unwavering eye contact, she spoke passionately about the values that shaped her political outlook: faith, family, discipline, and hard work. She described growing up in a modest home where her father rose before dawn and worked late into the night. A man who taught her that public service was about integrity, not popularity. The crowd was listening closely. Even those who disagreed with her politically seemed to soften, drawn in by the sincerity of her voice. This wasn't rehearsed rhetoric. This was personal, she continued. "I learned what sacrifice really means by watching my father give everything he had. Not for power, not for praise, but for his family. That's why I'm here tonight, because I believe we need leaders who understand the people they serve." There was a pause. Just long enough for the words to hang in the air. And that's when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, eyes glinting, lips curled into a sharp, knowing smirk. She waved her hand like she was swatting away a mosquito. "Oh, come on, Karoline," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Is this the part where we all hold hands and sing songs about how perfect your family is?" A few people chuckled, uncertain laughter, the kind that fills a room when people aren't sure if they should laugh or cringe. Karoline's mouth twitched, but she didn't speak. Crockett, emboldened by the moment, wasn't finished. With a mockingly sweet tone, she added, "I bet your dad still reads bedtime stories about Ronald Reagan." This time, the laughter was louder. Some clapped. Others looked around awkwardly, unsure of how to react. The moderator shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Karoline didn't respond. She blinked. Once. Then again. And in that tiny space of silence, so brief it could have been missed by anyone not paying attention, her expression changed, not with rage, not with a clever comeback, but with something far more vulnerable. Disappointment. It was subtle. A slight downturn of the mouth. A swallow, hard and slow. She looked down for just a moment, gathering herself, and then straightened her back, trying to hold composure. She had expected to debate policies. She hadn't expected her family to become the punchline of a joke. The laughter in the room began to fade. Even the supporters who had clapped moments earlier now seemed hesitant, perhaps realizing the joke had landed too hard. And that's when it happened. From the farthest row in the auditorium, a section nearly swallowed by darkness, a figure slowly rose from his seat. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a plain, dark suit and tie. He moved with calm deliberation. No words, no theatrics. Just quiet, commanding presence. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room. Karoline noticed him almost immediately. Her eyes locked onto the figure, and her breath caught. It was her father. There was no mistaking him. He stood with the same quiet strength she had described just minutes earlier. The same man who had held her hand on the first day of school, who had driven through snowstorms to get to work, who had stayed up late at the kitchen table helping her study for civics tests. She now credits with inspiring her love for the Constitution. Now he stood silently in a room full of strangers, not to defend himself with words, not to argue, but simply to be seen, to remind her, perhaps, that he was there, and that she wasn't alone. The effect was instantaneous. The mood in the auditorium shifted. Jasmine Crockett, who just seconds earlier had been basking in the laughter of her quip, leaned back slightly in her chair. The grin softened. Her eyes darted to the man in the back. For a moment, she looked unsure, maybe even remorseful. Even the moderator seemed frozen in place, unsure whether to continue or let the silence do its work. The cameras, ever hungry for drama, cut to a close-up of the man. His face was stoic, not angry, not emotional, just resolute. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Karoline inhaled deeply. Her gaze still fixed on him. She nodded, just slightly, as if drawing strength from the quiet figure standing in her corner. Then she turned back to the microphone, her voice low but unwavering. "There's nothing funny about a man who's given everything for his family," she said. "And if that's something worth mocking, then maybe we've forgotten what respect really looks like." Silence. No one clapped. No one cheered. The room wasn't sure how to respond. Not yet, and Karoline didn't need them to. Because in that moment, she had already won something far more important than an argument. She had reclaimed her story, not with a shout, not with a counterattack, but with grace. With dignity, and with the quiet, powerful presence of the man who had taught her both. He didn't say a word, but in a room where voices had battled for dominance, where applause, jeers, and political jabs had echoed for nearly an hour, his silence was thunderous. The man standing at the very back of the auditorium wasn't a senator. He wasn't a media figure or a campaign donor. He was a father, a working-class American, a man who had lived his values rather than preached them. The cameras swung around, reacting instinctively, catching the image that would soon be replayed across every major network and social media platform. His face was calm, almost unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment, something far deeper, resolve. Commentators backstage, caught in mid-sentence, stopped speaking. Producers waved hands in the air, trying to figure out what was happening. The audio team froze. News anchors, fed lines through earpieces, were silent. This wasn't in the script. Even Jasmine Crockett, who moments earlier had delivered her mockery with all the confidence of a practiced performer, sat back in her chair. Her smile faded, not in fear, but in realization. Something had shifted. Not in the debate, but in the air, in the very tone of the room. Because what everyone was seeing wasn't drama. It was something raw, something rare, something real. Karoline Leavitt, who had kept her composure through the jab, through the laughter, through the uncomfortable silence that followed, finally turned her head. She looked back, eyes scanning the crowd until they found him. And in that moment, everything else disappeared. The lights, the cameras, the audience, the political stage, all gone. Just a daughter and a father. Their eyes met. He didn't nod. He didn't gesture. But he didn't have to. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. But something inside her shifted. Strength returned, not loud, not showy, but solid. Grounded. She gave the tiniest nod, not to him, but to herself. A silent reaffirmation. You belong here. You earned this. Now finish strong. And so she turned back to the microphone. The room was utterly still. Even those in the audience who had laughed just moments earlier now sat on the edge of their seats. Karoline took a breath. Not to calm down, but to center herself. And then, with a voice that was softer than before, but clearer, firmer, more rooted, she spoke. I know that politics can be brutal. That's not new. What is new is how quickly we forget that behind every person on this stage is a family, a story, a life. No one interrupted. My father never asked for the spotlight. He doesn't give speeches. He doesn't chase cameras. But what he gave me is something that can't be mocked, because it's real. He gave me courage. He gave me purpose. He gave me the strength to stand here, even when the room turns cold. You could hear the soft whir of a camera lens adjusting. That's how quiet it had become. When I say I believe in family values, it's not because it sounds good in a campaign ad. It's because I watched a man live those values every single day. Quietly, faithfully, without expecting anything. In return, the moderator, previously poised to move on, didn't dare interrupt. Karoline's tone didn't waver. She wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to win the crowd back. She didn't need to. And if that makes me the butt of a joke, so be it. Because I'd rather stand with the people who raised me than sit with those who think respect is something we can afford to laugh at. Her final words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were spoken with the kind of confidence that doesn't come from applause, but from truth. And when she finished, the silence lingered. A respectful, almost sacred silence. Then, slowly from the back, a single clap echoed through the hall. Then another, and another, until a wave of applause moved through the room, not in thunderous chaos, but in measured recognition. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Not just for the politics, but for the humanity of it. Even Jasmine Crockett gave a nod, not as an opponent conceding defeat, but as a woman acknowledging something powerful had just happened. A moment she hadn't intended, but one she couldn't ignore. The father, still standing, slowly sat down. His face never changed. He didn't smile or bow. He simply took his seat, his job done, without ever saying a word. And just like that, the debate resumed. But the tone had changed. The energy had shifted. Viewers watching from home weren't talking about tax reform or climate policy anymore. They were talking about that moment, the moment a father stood, the moment a daughter found her voice, and the moment politics was reminded that behind every podium stands a person, shaped by love, by sacrifice, and by stories that can't be measured in poll numbers. Because sometimes the loudest statement doesn't come from a microphone. Sometimes it rises from the back of the room and says nothing at all. I talk about my family, Karoline said quietly, because they're the reason I'm here. Her voice was calm, measured, but unmistakably steady. Gone was the earlier tension, replaced now with a presence that didn't demand the room's attention. It simply held it. She didn't gesture wildly. She didn't raise her voice. She just spoke, and that somehow was more powerful than any fiery comeback. She turned slightly, pointing gently toward the back of the room, where her father still stood. A lone silhouette against the backdrop of a national debate. He's not a politician, she said, her words soft but echoing across the hushed auditorium. He's not a billionaire. He's a man who worked 2 jobs to put me through school. He came home with sore hands, tired eyes, but never once complained. Not once. The crowd remained absolutely still. No murmurs, no shifting, just the quiet hum of cameras recording what was quickly becoming one of the most emotionally resonant moments of the night. Karoline's eyes stayed fixed on the audience now, not as a candidate trying to win votes, but as a daughter explaining something deeper, something more human than policy or party. "He taught me to stand tall when I'm mocked," she continued. "He taught me to speak up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She paused, just for a breath, but it was a deliberate pause, a moment to let her words land. "I'm not perfect," she said next. "My family's not perfect. But we show up, we fight, and we don't tear others down just to win a few claps." The line wasn't aimed directly at Crockett, but its weight was felt by everyone. Somewhere in the audience a hand went to a heart. Someone else nodded slowly. Even viewers at home, watching on screens hundreds of miles away, would later say it felt like Karoline was talking to them, not at them. Even those who had disagreed with her politics just minutes earlier found themselves unable to look away. Because this was no longer about left or right. It was about right and wrong, about dignity, about backbone, about a young woman refusing to let a moment of mockery define her. And it wasn't just her words that carried the weight. It was the truth in her delivery, the vulnerability she dared to show when she could have chosen vengeance. Across the stage, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly now. No interruptions, no quips. She listened, her earlier jab, the one that had earned laughter and applause, now hung in the air, soured by the authenticity of what followed. And then, as Karoline finished her thought, her father finally moved. With quiet grace, he lowered himself back into his seat. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't made a scene. But his presence had said more than any debate soundbite ever could, and that silent motion, just the act of sitting down, felt like the closing of a chapter, a statement soft but strong. My daughter didn't need defending. She did that all on her own. The moderator, still stunned, didn't rush to move the debate forward. Even the producers behind the scenes were hesitant. This wasn't a moment they could easily cut away from. It had become too real, too human. And then, perhaps most surprisingly, Jasmine Crockett did something no one expected. She nodded. Slowly, respectfully. Not with sarcasm or showmanship, but with acknowledgement. Perhaps it was recognition of the courage Karoline had shown, or maybe, just maybe, it was her own understanding, because beneath the titles and party lines, she too was someone's daughter. Karoline didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply offered a small, appreciative glance to her opponent and then turned back toward the audience. The applause didn't come right away. And that was telling, because the crowd wasn't responding like it would to a political zinger or a campaign promise. They were processing, feeling, reflecting. And then it came, not a roar, but a steady build, one person clapping, then another. Then more, until the room filled with the kind of applause that wasn't just loud. It was earned. Karoline stepped back from the microphone, but not before offering one last thought. Politics should be about people, not personalities, not put-downs, and certainly not cheap shots. If we're going to lead, we need to remember who we're doing it for. I never forget, because mine is sitting right there. The camera cut to her father, still seated, still quiet, but unmistakably proud. In that instant, the narrative of the debate changed completely. What had started as a heated exchange had transformed into a defining moment, one that would be clipped, shared, and replayed, not because it was controversial, but because it was real. And in a world drowning in noise, authenticity stands out. Karoline Leavitt didn't win the debate by being the loudest voice in the room. She won by being the truest. The clip went viral within hours, not because of a shouting match, Not because someone won with a clever insult or a fiery comeback, but because, in a debate filled with noise, silence spoke the loudest. By sunrise the next day, footage of Karoline Leavitt's heartfelt response and her father's silent stand had spread like wildfire across social media. It was posted, reposted, and subtitled in dozens of languages. People weren't just watching, they were feeling something. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about a moment that transcended party lines and tapped into something everyone could relate to: family, respect, and grace under pressure. A father's silent stand, a daughter's steady voice. Commentators across the spectrum began weighing, and some were moved to tears, describing the moment as a rare and genuine reminder that public figures are human too. That behind every campaign is a story of sacrifice, of someone who stood behind them long before the cameras showed up. One anchor said it best. "We often ask our politicians to be tough, but last night, Karoline showed us that toughness doesn't always come with a raised voice. Sometimes it comes with composure, with heart." Others, of course, tried to politicize the moment. Some defended Jasmine Crockett, claiming her jab was typical debate banter, something all politicians engage. And sooner or later, they argued she was being authentic, playing to her base, keeping things sharp. In their view, she was doing exactly what politics demands: punch, parry, perform. But even among Crockett's supporters, there was acknowledgement that something deeper had happened on that stage. Whether you agree with her or not, one analyst admitted, Karoline Leavitt reminded us that dignity still matters, and in today's climate, that's not nothing. A moment bigger than politics. The power of Karoline's response wasn't just in her words, it was in how she said them. No anger, no bitterness, just strength, and more importantly, perspective. She could have taken the bait. She could have turned the moment into a personal attack or tried to win the crowd back with theatrics. Instead, she took a breath and chose vulnerability. That choice, to respond instead of react, was what made the moment unforgettable. It made people stop scrolling. It made them listen. And in an era where so much of public discourse is reduced to viral zingers and character assassinations, Karoline's calm rebuttal stood out like a whisper in a storm. It reminded viewers, whether they wore red or blue, that behind every polished smile on stage is a story. A family. A father quietly standing in the back row, proud but humble, strong but unseen. That's the part people couldn't stop talking about. Not the debate topic, not the polling implications, the father, the silence, the steady voice of a daughter. The internet reacts clips were everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. On TikTok, one creator simply captioned the video, "This is how you carry grace." Another viral video stitched together footage of her father standing with a voiceover from a poem. Not all heroes wear capes. Some just stand up and say nothing. Twitter debates raged into the night. Some called it staged. Others claimed it was unscripted brilliance. But one tweet, simple and sincere, got nearly 1 million likes. I don't care what side you're on. That dad? That daughter? That's what strength looks like. Even public figures chimed in. Former presidents, authors, and athletes praised the moment. One news commentator broke down during a live segment saying, "I wish my dad could have seen that. He passed last year, and watching that young woman speak with such poise in front of the world, it just hit me." It hit everyone. Crockett's response, to her credit, Jasmine Crockett responded with humility. In a follow-up interview, she said, "I was trying to be funny. I misread the moment. That's on me. I've been in enough fights to know when I should have kept it in my back pocket." Karoline handled it with class, it wasn't an apology, but it was a recognition. And sometimes, recognition is enough to begin a shift. The next time the two women met on stage, weeks later for a town hall, there were no cheap shots, just discussion, respectful disagreement. It was a quieter event, but one that many said was more productive. The echo of that night's moment had changed the dynamic, not just between two politicians, but in the tone of the national conversation. The legacy of one quiet moment weeks passed, but the clip continued to be shared. Students discussed it in classrooms. Sunday sermons referenced it. Families talked about it over dinner, because it wasn't just a moment of politics. It was a mirror, a reminder of who we are and who we hope to be. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the debate mattered so much. Not because it changed the polls, but because it reminded us that humanity still has a place on the political stage. One daughter, one father, one choice to rise above the noise. And that, perhaps, is what made this debate unforgettable. This wasn't just a debate moment. It was a reminder of how fast words can cut, how silence can speak louder than applause, and how dignity often rises not with a roar but in a whisper. Sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that says nothing at all.